Hi, my name is Patience, and on Wednesdays I do deep dives into topics I find really interesting. And today I want us to talk about the self-help industry and motivational speakers. I want to discuss why the self-help industry has exploded into a multi-billion-dollar industry. And as someone who has dabbled in self-help myself, I very much wanted to understand what it is about self-help and motivational speakers that draws us to them and also makes us willing to spend so much money on them. Because now, believe it or not, there are people spending thousands of pounds on self-help guru retreats. People have money. Self-help has existed for many years, and with the invention of the internet and digital spaces like social media, it has exploded in popularity, with very notable names being people like Gary Vee, Tony Robbins, Eric Thomas, Mel Robbins, and many, many more. Self-help has expanded from just books to now workshops, seminars, online courses, as well as those £1,000 or $1,000 retreats that I was speaking about earlier. The top 17 motivational speakers make around 300 million a year. Are they hiring? Other products such as productivity apps, meditation apps, self-help podcasts, as well as audiobooks have also made self-help a lot easier to take on the go. Now let's look at some stats. So according to market research, self-help is expected to be worth $14 billion by 2025. Roughly 75 million self-help consumers in the US are millennials. Similar patterns are also seen in other parts of the world, like here in the UK. Self-help books in 2018 reached a revenue of $769 million. According to Quartz, 3/4 of self-help readers are women. And TechChat reports that self-help tools such as meditation apps are on the rise, with the top 10 meditation apps making $195 million in 2019. Now, if you watch my content long enough, you'll realize that I love patterns. I love looking at patterns, exploring patterns, understanding why they happen. So we are 100% going to dive into these stats to find out what's going on here. So let's start with millennials. A survey found that 94% of millennials reported to have made some form of self-improvement commitment. The survey also found that millennials are far more likely than other generations to invest money into their self-improvement. Now, as a baby millennial myself, yes, I only just squeeze in. I'm like right at the end, I'm like very close to the cutoff point. I just kind of like squeezed in like, hi. Now, I've heard some people say that people born right at the end of the millennial cutoff point are called zillennials or something. I don't know, I can't keep up. But yes, as a millennial myself, I'm very interested to know why we are so invested in self-help and self-improvement regardless of where in the world we are. George J. Ziogas, I hope that's how you pronounce his name. I'm gonna spell it, and like someone can tell me if this is pronounced correctly if you happen to know. It's spelled Ziogas. I'm gonna go with Ziogas, but I never claimed to be good at pronouncing names, so don't come for me, okay? But he wrote an article called Why So Many Millennials Are Obsessed with Self-Improvement. And he argued that one of the big reasons for this is because of globalization as well as the rise of the internet. The internet has connected us in a way that previous generations were not connected before. So it's not really too surprising that we're having similarities in terms of our views and cultures despite not being in the same place. But George argued because of social media and the internet, we are now more exposed to so many different opportunities as well as a new variety of ideas. He also argued that the three reasons that he thinks why millennials are so drawn to self-help content is because 1, we are spoilt for choice, 2, we want to measure up, and 3, we have high expectations. In today's world, if you are fortunate enough to not have food and shelter be your number one priority, then you're probably struggling with other things like figuring out who you want to be or what you want to do. In today's time, there are endless choices in terms of the media you want to consume, the job you want to do, the people you want to date, the lifestyle you want to have, the consumer goods you want to buy. This abundance of choice can be amazing, but also at times kind of paralyzing. It's kind of like, when you go to the shop, well, when I go to the shop and I want to buy something, like say a chocolate bar, I'll go to the shop and I want to buy a chocolate bar and there's like so many options and I'll be there for a minute, okay?
What do you want?
It's not that simple.
What do you want?
I'll be there for a while trying to figure out what chocolate to buy, and sometimes I just won't buy either. I won't buy any of them, or I'll buy more than one. This is the reason why I prefer to go to buffets, because I hate having to decide what to eat on a menu. Because we have so much choice and we struggle to make decisions in terms of who we want to be or what we want to do, self-help tends to offer us the opportunity to figure out our true purpose or figure out our true sense of self. Another reason George provided was expectation. He argued that young people are incredibly idealistic. This is also the reason why young people tend to be more drawn to things such as social justice or activism. We have very idealistic views and perceptions of the world and what we think the world should be, and we're often very disappointed when our expectations don't match up with reality. What also doesn't help us millennials is that we're also hyper aware of how behind we are compared to other generations. This hyper awareness that we have about how we're not as far ahead as our parents may have been at our age is what makes us very hypercritical of ourselves. We're so hypercritical, and it draws us to self-help because we want to improve, because we're not very happy with ourselves and where we're at the moment. According to the Wall Street Journal, millennials are the most educated generation, but with the increasing cost of education, student loan debt, as well as poor job prospects, a lot of millennials are currently in limbo. Millennials, along with Gen Z, are very often mocked for being lazy, entitled, and having a poor work ethic. Which, by the way, can I just say, literally happens to every single generation. The youngest generation always gets this. Whoever's gonna come after Gen Z, it's gonna be their turn too. I don't know what it is with generational wars, but people insist on keeping them going. Millennials are also often used as scapegoats for a lot of social problems by older generations. And because of this, this also makes us more drawn to self-help, because for some millennials, they want to prove these generations wrong. So a lot of millennials may seek out self-help in order to improve themselves and in order to become more successful so that they can break away from these stereotypes. Another aspect of measuring up comes from the fact that younger millennials, shout out to all my fellow baby millennials, we grew up with the internet. We were the first generation to grow up with the internet and then eventually grow up with social media. Most of us were already on social media by the time we were in our early teens. Because of this, our generation has much more access to other people's lives than previous generations. We are able to see people with more money than us, people with more accolades, success, and luxuries, and as a result, we often find ourselves comparing ourselves to those people, and it makes us feel more inadequate. And this can create a desire for us to want to measure up and to also aspire to be like the people who are more wealthy and successful than us. We are now seeing the highlight reels of people's lives, and it's become even more accessible now because it's literally on our phone. Comparing ourselves to people who we don't know, unfortunately, does create a lot of insecurities and does also create very low self-esteem. And so we might seek out self-help gurus or motivational books in order to try and improve our situation so that we can replicate the lifestyles that we see on the internet. So I mentioned before that Quartz found that 3/4 of self-help readers are women. Now, I found this super interesting because if you've really dabbled into self-help, you'll notice that most self-help speakers, self-help writers are men. So I did find it really interesting that men seem to write or create the content and women tend to be the main ones who consume it. Surveys have found that the types of people who are more prone to seeking out self-help content typically tend to be people who are more sensitive to stress, who experience higher levels of anxiety, and who may also have depressive disorders. And interestingly enough, the type of people who are the most likely to have these disorders are women. Olivia Rems from the Cambridge Institute of Public Health discussed why women tend to be more prone to anxiety disorders. In her article, she stated the biological factors that make women more prone to anxiety disorders, for example, our hormone fluctuations. She also found that women's reproductive events also contribute to certain anxiety disorders. For example, women who are pregnant due to the hormone fluctuations are more likely to develop OCD or overcompulsive disorder. She found that this was due to the sudden surge in estrogen and progesterone that occurs in pregnant women. Olivia also stated that the reason why women may be more likely to suffer with anxiety is due to the fact that we just don't cope with it in the same way that men do. Women are more likely to think very deeply about it. We're more likely to kind of dwell on it a bit, maybe overanalyze it a cheeky bit. And I'm not gonna lie, she might as well just at me, okay? Because she basically described me. Just at me, Olivia. You're talking about me. just at me. Studies have found that experiencing child abuse appears to have a much more detrimental effect on women, as research has shown that childhood abuse can alter women's brain chemistry. For example, they found that women who experienced abuse during childhood had an abnormal blood flow within their hippocampus, and this is the part of the brain that is used for emotion processing. Because of this abnormality, they were more prone to anxiety disorders, and of course, understandably, if you are someone who's experienced traumatic events like that, you are naturally going to be more prone to things like PTSD and other anxiety disorders as well. Now, you're probably thinking, thanks for the biology lesson, Patience, but what has that got to do with women and self-help? As I mentioned before, the largest demographic of self-help consumers are people who are sensitive to stress or who deal with anxiety or depressive disorders. So naturally, if these disorders are more prevalent in women, then it makes sense as to why they are the largest demographic of self-help consumers. And if you've ever experienced anxiety and depression, then you may already know that these disorders make you feel as though you no longer have control. Anyone who has experienced these things knows just how out of control you feel. You know, when you can't control your mind, that's probably about as out of control as you could possibly be. When you're struggling to sleep because you can't stop yourself from thinking about things because your anxiety is kicking on, or when you're having a panic attack and you can't control your body and your breathing, and you can't control, you know, how that suffocated feeling in that moment because you are not in control. When you're feeling depressed and you have absolutely no idea why you feel that way, but you just know all of a sudden you can't get yourself out of bed. This is what makes self-help so appealing. It gives people the opportunity to try and regain that control by having a better understanding of themselves and also offering coping mechanisms so that it doesn't hinder them from being able to accomplish whatever they want to accomplish in life. Which is why I think Mel Robbins is a very interesting motivational speaker person, because I have watched a lot of her content and I have read some of her books, and she does talk a lot about psychology and anxiety, and she was the one who created the 5-second rule. The 5-second rule is basically this like technique that she created. Well, I don't know if she created it, but she popularized it, and it's basically where you count backwards from 5 to 1 and then you do whatever it is that you are scared to do. Apparently it's supposed to interrupt the part of your brain that normally kicks in and convinces you not to do stuff. You know, kind of like when you want to go to the gym, yeah? You know, you're like, oh, I want to go to the gym, and then you're like, oh, like you get up, you're like, oh, I should go to the gym today. I should go to the gym today, and then your mind is like, but should you though? Should you go to the gym? That part of your brain that talks you out of doing stuff, if you count backwards from 5 to 1, it's supposed to stop that process from happening so that you're able to just get up and go. It's kind of the reason why kids, like teachers, you know, when they're at the top of the class and they're trying to get the kids to be quiet and they say 5, 4, and it just gets them to stop. I don't know why. It's just something about the counting backwards thing just kind of interrupts something in the brain, you know? And it gets you to do things. So I've tried it. It does work. I don't know if it's working because it works or if it's working because of like a placebo effect kind of thing. But I've tried it a few times and it works. Another reason that's also been suggested for why women are more likely to seek out self-help compared to men is because a lot of women often feel as though they have more to prove. Because of how hard women have had to work and fight to get access to rights such as being in the workplace, some of them often feel as though they have to prove their position and prove that they deserve to be there. This often happens especially earlier on in their careers when they're a lot younger. Studies have found that women are more agreeable than men, and women are more likely to have confidence issues and also feel uncomfortable with being assertive. So some women may use self-help as a way of learning how to acquire these skills so that they can learn to be more assertive and feel more confident doing so. I think I've just had an aha moment. Okay, I think I know the reason why there's more men making the content. We know that typically speaking, men tend to be less agreeable and tend to be more confident than women. This is the reason why men tend to end up in higher positions of power and also end up earning more in a lot of cases because they're not afraid to negotiate and ask for what they feel they deserve. Whereas a lot of women struggle to do this. Like a lot of women tend to be more afraid to demand things or to ask for things. I see this all the time with YouTubers, for example. I've seen so many female YouTubers say how they were so relieved to finally have a manager because their least favorite part about their job was discussing how much they should get paid for sponsorships and stuff, because they would always lowball themselves because they didn't they felt uncomfortable asking for more. So this tends to be a thing that psychologists have found anyway with women, is that we do tend to be more agreeable. We're less likely to be confrontational. You have to have a certain level of confidence and a certain sense of authority for you to enter a self-help industry, because you are essentially going into an industry where you're telling people how to live their lives. You have to be very sure of yourself to think that you have that information to give. You have to be fairly confident. Not saying it's a bad thing either, I'm just saying it's the truth. You have to be fairly sure of yourself to go into an industry where your job is literally to tell people how to live their lives. So it makes sense as to how men would end up being the content creators and the authors of these kind of books, because they tend to be more confident and tend to be more assertive and tend to just be more boisterous, if you will, whereas women tend to be more agreeable, less confrontational, more compassionate, tend to be more used to making ourselves smaller, if that makes sense. So it makes sense that as women start to climb up the ranks, start to enter more positions of power, start to demand more for their lives in terms of wanting to have, you know, bigger careers, etc., that they would start reading these books and in the process start learning how to be more in control, how to be more assertive, how to be more dominant in the work field, especially if they are in industries that are very heavily dominated by men. So in a way, it's kind of as though, because these men are writing these books from their male perspective, and so naturally they're going to be writing it from how a man would view the world. So we women are essentially learning how to view the world from a more masculine lens and learning how to view the world from a more male perspective. I understand that, of course, masculinity is not exclusive to women, femininity is not exclusive to men. Men can be feminine, women can be masculine, but we're speaking in general terms here, so don't be nitpicky, okay? So yeah, because these men are writing these books from their very male perspective, it allows us as women to view their perspective. It allows us to see how men view the world. It allows us to think like these men who write these books. It allows us to adopt a lot of these characteristics and these traits that they have that allowed them to be successful, such as being more confident, being more assertive, being more in control, and not being afraid to ask for what you want, and being slightly less agreeable so that you can, you know, stand up for yourself in the workforce, especially if you are in an industry that is heavily dominated by men. I honestly think that's it. I think that's why. I think that makes sense. Women are more agreeable, so we're more likely to listen. Men are less agreeable, so they're more likely to try and take the lead. Therefore, they end up making all the creative content, and we end up being the ones who read it. But I'd love to know what you think on that. Why do you think there are more men in the creative side of self-help and more women in the consumption side of self-help? Since the invention of the internet, we have more access to news 24/7 than any generation has ever before. Because of this, there are much higher rates of anxiety. Our generation definitely has a very big case of information overload, to the point where it's made us very, very pessimistic about the world. And years ago, religion was a very big part of Western culture. And as we've become less religious, people have needed a substitute to help them cope. Some argue that self-help is within itself a new form of religion. When you think about it, you can kind of see it, because, for example, when you hear a lot of these motivational preachers, I even call them preachers. When you hear a lot of these motivational speakers speaking, it does feel like you're at a church service. It does feel like you're listening to a pastor or a preacher. It's this very, very similar setup. Like they feel very similar to a lot of these televangelists. And what's also interesting is that self-help also has quite a lot of religious undertones to it. Some of the founding fathers of self-help used to preach things like God helps those who help themselves. That's actually not in the Bible, by the way. But yeah, there were some self-help gurus who used to put that forward. Also, self-help has a lot of Buddhist undertones to it. For example, within the Buddhist religion, the ultimate goal is enlightenment. The Buddhist religion tends to preach a lot about the embracing of suffering and the understanding of suffering in order for you to reach your true enlightened state. And a lot of self-help preachers do talk about that. They talk about, you know, overcoming your hardships and embracing, like Eric Thomas is a great example of a motivational speaker who does that. He very much preaches this idea that you need to take on your pain and you need to utilize your pain to become a better version of yourself. And you can hear this messaging preached within a lot of motivational speakers. There are a lot of motivational speakers that I've seen who do very much preach the idea that all the things that you've been through in your life, the bad, the suffering and stuff, that's stuff that's going to make you stronger, and you should utilize that in terms of bettering yourself and progressing yourself forward. We've also found as well that things like meditation and yoga have also been very closely tied with the idea of self-help and self-love, and it's very interesting to see that take place as well, because of course meditation is very much within the Buddhist religion. Yoga is also a religious practice. I don't know exactly which religion it is, but I know it is. I do know that it does originate from a religion within Asia. And it's very interesting to see these things become popularized within the West and be very much associated with self-help and self-care. A lot of the time you will hear people who are very positive and optimistic, who are into self-help, who also tell you that they use apps like Headspace or other meditation apps fairly regularly, or you'll hear people who do yoga, you know? Like, that's why some people tell you, like, when you're feeling kind of down, just do yoga. Okay. Now, there are some people who are skeptical of self-help. They say things like, well, if self-help was so effective, why do self-help gurus still have customers? You know, a lot of these people who buy self-help content usually buy multiple. So you'll buy the first book, you'll maybe buy the second book, you know, or you'll go to multiple seminars. But, you know, in theory, if it was so effective and it was so good, you might not need to do that. You would get your fix, you would go do your thing, and that's it. But these self-help gurus continuously have customers. So it does beg the question of how effective is it? Why haven't we all transcended into superhumans yet with limitless achievements, if you will? One of the biggest criticisms of self-help is the idea that they are very vague. A lot of self-help gurus tend to focus on things such as like mindset. You need to change your mindset. They don't really give clear steps in terms of what exactly you need to do to become successful. They focus very much on your state of mind and your self-belief and all of these things, but don't actually give you clear step-by-steps as to how you get from point A to rich. Because of the fact that they're so vague, it allows the consumer to fill in the gaps with their own personal experiences. So this allows self-help gurus to reach a much larger range of audiences. Because if they were very, very specific, then it would only target that very specific audience. I think it's this kind of hope and optimism that makes people do things like buy lottery tickets and scratch cards. Like, you know, the odds of you winning is like slim to none, but they're not zero. And I think it's kind of similar with self-help. There are a lot of people who just, you know, they're very passionate about whatever it is that they're into, and they hope that there could be the one that makes it happen. And in all fairness, you could be. If you are talented enough and you work hard enough and you are privileged enough to live in a country where you're able to climb up the social ladder or climb up the financial ladder, for example, if you live here in the UK or you live in the States, I do think that people do have the opportunities to make themselves into whatever they want to make themselves in, provided they have the skill, competence, talent, and work ethic to make it happen. I think you can do pretty much whatever you want to do. Eric Thomas is a great example. He's one of the motivational speakers that I addressed earlier on in the video. He was homeless. He was living on the streets, and then he is now, I assume, a multi-millionaire. There's no way he can't, because he's definitely a multi-millionaire. And there's loads of examples like that where people started out at nothing and became what they became. I think nowadays we love to vilify rich people, and we love to push the narrative that anybody who's really successful didn't earn it and they just got it, and that it's very unfair. And granted, there are some people who are where they are because of their family or because of their parents or whatever, but there are also a lot of people who have been able to work hard to get where they got to, because we do live under capitalism, and capitalism allows you the ability to climb up the social ladder. So yeah, I think if there is something that you want to do, if you're talented at what it is and you are willing to work your ass off for it, I strongly encourage you to pursue it. You never know what happens. It could be the best decision of your life, it could be the worst decision of your life, but you'll never know if you don't try. I also just want to add that the reason why I believe this is because the technological advancements that have happened have really opened up the doors and provided so much more opportunity. The gatekeepers that would have existed within previous generations no longer control access to the market. And also with the internet, you also have a lot more time. Before, it would have been impossible for someone to be working full time while simultaneously building their own company. If you were trying to sell products, you had to physically leave your house and network and meet new customers. whereas now you can do all of that from the comfort of your own home thanks to social media. The same thing applies for people who want to get into entertainment or into more artsy industries. All you now need is internet access and a smartphone, and you can start building your own audience online. Now, ironically, there's an industry called anti-self-help, and this is basically exactly what it sounds like. People who write books, but instead of being positive, they're kind of pessimistic, but still in a helpful way. A good example of this is Mark Manson. He wrote the book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a F. Manson's perspective was basically this: through pursuing self-improvement and through pursuing self-help, it makes you worse off. So basically, his idea was that if people are so hyper-focused on improving themselves and hyper-focused on trying to become something else other than what they are currently, they are inevitably creating their own suffering, because you're constantly feeling as though you're lesser than what you would like to be. So he believes in just accepting your reality and embracing your reality and making peace with the fact that this is where you are, and that's okay. Which I can kind of see where he's coming from with that, because there are some people who become very, very depressed because they think they should be somewhere else and they're not there. They can't help but obsess over the fact that they're not where they would like to be in life, and it makes them unable to enjoy life. Because there's so much more to life than being super rich or being a business owner or, you know, a boss babe. There's making memories with the people you love, your family, your friends, and just enjoying the beauty, the subtle beauties of life. And I think that's why I personally have an issue with the idea of demonizing 9-to-5s, because there are some people who love their 9-to-5s. They like the fact that they have a secure job, you know, an employer to pay them. They don't have to, because a lot of people who end up being self-employed always say this. They say they end up working way more hours than they ever did when they were employed. And to some people that's worth it, and to some people it's not, because you are losing time that you could be using on other things, maybe pursuing hobbies that you like or spending more time with your family and friends. So, and some people don't want to sacrifice those things, and I don't think you should have to. If you don't want to, don't. And so I can understand where he's coming from with that, because yeah, I think people obsessing over money and wealth and luxurious goods, it is making people lose sight of other things that are also important. And I think, so I can understand where he's coming from with that. And I think, yeah, so if you are watching this right now and you're in a 9-to-5 job and you like your 9-to-5 job, don't allow anyone to make you feel inadequate for the fact that you chose to stay within the system. Don't allow anyone to make you feel inadequate for the fact that you are content with not trying to be the next Gary Vee or trying to be the next Elon Musk, okay? Life is so much more than just being rich and being a multi-gazillionaire. A lot of people struggle to be happy. So if you are in a situation where you are happy and you are content with your life, then in my opinion, you are successful. So congratulations to you. So a lot of what Manson has argued has also been echoed by other critics of self-help. For example, some people have argued that motivational speakers as well as self-help books promote toxic positivity, which is the idea that you are supposed to look at the bright side of everything all the time, even if it's not necessarily helpful. You know those people, like when you're feeling really like when you're going through a depression and they just tell you to have some more gratitude? Those kind of people. Don't get me wrong, I think having perspective and having gratitude is definitely a good thing to try and do, you know, because it is true, there is always going to be someone out there who has it worse than you. However, I also think it's okay for you to experience what you're feeling, because just because someone has a broken leg doesn't mean that your broken arm doesn't hurt. I think it's okay for people to feel down sometimes. But I do agree that it's not helpful for you or your mental health to wallow in it. And obviously if it's beyond you, seek professional help. But I think there's like a video of this actually of Gary Vee doing this toxic positivity thing. Don't get me wrong, I like Gary Vee. I find him kind of funny, but he says some wild things sometimes. I think there was a video of him where this woman was asking him for advice on how to stay positive, and he told her to imagine her family getting shot in the face.
Who do you love the most in the world?
My family.
Good. Who in your family? Pick one.
All of them.
Every day, like literally once a day, genuinely sit there for 5 minutes and pretend one of them got shot in the face.
Another criticism of motivational speakers and self-help is that they do create a good condition for people to be taken advantage of. For example, we have seen that with the rise of self-help and motivational speakers, there has also been a rise in MLM recruitment, especially for women. So if you're not sure what MLM is, it's multi-level marketing. It's basically a pyramid scheme. I'm going to try my best to explain this. I think I have the definition down somewhere. One second. So multi-level marketing are non-salaried workforce that rely on employees, quote unquote, because they're not paid, but they're classified as employees. They rely on their employees to buy products in order to get into the program. Then they are required to try and sell the products to whoever will basically listen or give them the time of day. So things like Avon, I think it's called Herbal Life, I think is another one. Basically, yeah, all of that kind of stuff. Anyone who tries to message you on Instagram and stuff and is like, hey girl, how would you like to join this, blah, blah, blah. Or anyone who tries to sell you this idea that you can have a job where you'll be self-employed and you won't have to work that many hours. You'll have so much free time to spend with your friends and family. And you also make so much money as well. Like you'll be so well off. Anyone who tries to sell you stuff like that just sounds too good to be true, those are the kind of like the MLM types. They're very, very active on social media. And yeah, and it's quite unfortunate. They typically tend to target women the most because a lot of the time there are a lot of mothers, for example, who would love to have a job where they are self-employed and can make good living whilst also having a lot of free time to take care of their kids. So it's unfortunate because women tend to be the biggest targets of these kinds of people because they fit the perfect description. One, that we've just learned in this video that they make up a big portion of self-help consumption. So they're reading all this information and it's motivating them to want to be self-employed business owners. It's encouraging them to, take control of their financial situation. And then on top of that, they also have circumstances in which maybe they need to have more time to be with their kids or they need extra cash to come in. But unfortunately, MLMs are pretty much scams. Don't trust anyone who tries to sell you that kind of dream. A lot of the time, people who join MLMs end up losing more money. And it's very unfortunate because these people do often target vulnerable people because vulnerable people are more desperate. The more desperate you are, the more likely you are to fall for scams. And it's just, it's not... Don't trust anyone who's offering you a job that has no salary and also requires you to pay money to get into it. Anything that has that description is very likely an MLM and you need to be like, thank you, but no thank you. Don't even respond, just block. That's what I do. When I get those random weird marketing messages, I just block. And unfortunately, the success of the self-help genre has encouraged some opportunists to come out and take advantage. There are some people who will pretend to have luxurious and successful lifestyles in order to lure people into buying their BS courses. So I would always caution you to be diligent with who you pay money to. Make sure they are exactly who they say they are. Do your research and don't just trust someone just because they have a flashy car. Some high-profile motivational speakers have also been caught up in some scandals and been caught up in doing some dodgy behavior. But honestly, to be honest, nowadays with the amount of free online self-help content, I don't really know why you would need to pay for a course. I mean, sure, granted, some people might be worth paying a little bit extra for the courses. I don't know. I've never paid for a course, but I think there's so much useful information that you can get for free. So it just makes more sense to just kind of not take the risk anyway by just keeping your money to yourself and just consuming free content online. So, self-help has been around for a very long time and I don't see it going anywhere anytime soon. I think that self-help can be very good for a lot of people. I definitely can say I've benefited from self-help in terms of, offering me a different perspective, and it's definitely been something that I can say that has been more beneficial to me than detrimental. Although I understand that that's not necessarily going to be the case for everybody. Not all of them are built equally. Some of them are definitely less ethical than others. So I think it is just really down to to also who you choose to listen to. You have to be very careful with that. So just make sure that you're not listening to someone who is telling you, one, to not sleep, and two, telling you to abandon everything else in your life but work. Anyone who tries to preach forward hustle culture and preach unrealistic work environments for you, I would definitely say probably not worth a listen. But I do think that there's also a lot of benefit for self-help for some people, because people make the assumption that everybody has access to these role models in their lives. People make the assumption that everybody has access to someone who will be able to make them feel as though they can accomplish things. And the reality is that's not true. There are a lot of people who feel like they will never be anything. There are a lot of people who feel like they'll never accomplish anything. They've either been raised that way, or they just haven't had any examples of people thinking like that around them. So, you know, when people say things like, oh, well, you know, like they're just preaching the obvious, it's like, yeah, it's obvious to you. It's not obvious to everybody else. Some people grew up in very toxic households where they were told they'd be nothing. They'd never be anything. They'd never accomplish anything. They've never had those role models to share those kind of messages to them. But, you know, like most things, everything is nuanced. Nothing is black and white. But it was really interesting to research this video because I'd never thought about self-help as a new form of religion. But the more I think about it, it makes sense. And I guess it is kind of like religion in the sense that you use it to cope with the suffering that exists in your life. You use it to process through all of that. You use it to find your purpose. You use it to find your meaning. And I get a lot of people need that, I guess, clearly. Otherwise the business wouldn't be booming if people didn't need it. And yeah, no, it's definitely been very interesting. So I would love to know if you are into self-help, and if you are into self-help, who are your favorite self-help authors or self-help gurus? What would you say are your favorite things about self-help and your least favorite things about self-help? This has been an incredibly long video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you managed to get this far in. If you did, you're a champ. You are a unicorn. People's attention spans are not as long as yours these days. If you enjoyed this video, then do like and subscribe. I'm also on Instagram and TikTok, so do follow me there if you'd like to see more of me. I also make music, so do check me out on Spotify. Links to all of my socials and my music will be in my description box. Thank you so much for giving me your time today, and I will see you next Wednesday. Ooh, that rhymed. What?